Good afternoon, class. Today we won't be learning our usual stuff, optics. We will be learning history, my history. Now, I found that very little of you know much about my character, or me. And so I shall start off with my childhood. I was born on 1642, Woolsthorpe, Lincolnshire, in England. And previously, 3 months before I was born, my father had died from an illness. And as I was growing up, I had been very sickly, and I didn't look as if I was going to live. So when my mother, she leaves me when I was 3 years old, and as she leaves me, she comes back to me when I'm 12 years old, and she leaves me for 9 years. And during those 9 years that she had left me, I was in my grandmother had taken me in. And so as my mother comes back, I was then enrolled into Grantham Grammar School. When I was in Grantham Grammar School, I didn't really want to be there. I actually sometimes would ditch class and sometimes not even show up. So 2 years of this, my mother had pulled me out of school and brought me back to manage her farm and estate. As my mother puts me back, my stepbrother had been taking over for me while the years I was at school. So my mother really didn't want me to leave because she thought I was doing a good job, but I really wasn't interested in it. So my uncle, William Uskoff, convinces my mother into putting me back into school. And so my uncle convinces her, and my mother puts me back into school, and I complete Grantham Grammar School. After this, I then move on to Cambridge University at Trinity College. And at Trinity College, Cambridge University, I meet a man named Stokes. This man Stokes, he introduces me to mathematics and science. And both these studies I had thought were ingenious to me. These two subjects were what I thrived from throughout my life, and he introduced it to me. So as I was walking through the town, I happened to come across a shop where many people have gone by, and I pick up a book on astrology by René Descartes. As I look through this book, I happen to notice that I don't really understand any of the subjects or the mathematics in it, so I devote myself to learn trigonometry. A perfect opportunity occurs when the plague hits after I get my bachelor's degree when I'm 23 years old. And now, during the 18 months that the plague has hit Cambridge University, we were all told to go home, and during these 18 months, it is highly crucial for me because I start to develop new ideas and theorems on my work. Instead of regular people, like just hanging out with their friends or just goofing off in class, many people would just not study for school. But I was one of those people that would just sit down and just study. So during these 18 months, it was really hard for me, and I just started to work my butt off. So during these 18 months, I had come across new ideas for calculus. I had created a form of calculus. I created the color spectrum, and I had come across gravity. Also, I was in I had created a new form of optics. So I suppose I shall tell you about how I came across gravity. As I was walking through an orchard, I was thinking about the moon and how it orbits the Earth. And as I was walking through that orchard, I happened to see an apple fall. And when I see the apple fall, I happened to notice that it fell to the Earth. It didn't just start floating off some random place. So I started relating it to the moon and saying, why isn't the moon falling towards the Earth? Now, I really didn't know much about mathematics at this time, so I just wrote it on a piece of paper, this idea, and just stored it away for 20 years. Now, a couple of months after this, the plague had left, and we were now allowed to come back to Cambridge University. At Cambridge University, I presented all of my work from those 18 months I had been working, and a man, the current Lucasian professor, had looked at my work, and he resigned his position of Lucasian professor and promoted me to it, and I was 25 years old at the time. Now, I was actually astonished by this because I didn't think anyone would do something like that, because there only could be one Lucasian professor at the time in England for 1 century, and I was the Lucasian professor for mathematics. So after this, I make my book on Principia, the first book of Principia, and I present it before the Royal Society, which I had been put into after I was Lucasian professor. And after this, I present this book, and a man named Robert Hooke starts to criticize every single aspect of it. But I didn't really like that, so I would start to back it up with backed up facts for my work, and he would keep criticizing me for all the stuff I had put into this book. And after a while, this man named Edmund Halley starts to recognize all my work and asks me if I wanted to get it published. So after that, I get it published, and after I get it published, I come into a nervous breakdown in 1693. In 1693, many people thought that I came into this nervous breakdown because either I had overworked myself or my previous work with mercury. Now, during this nervous breakdown, I had sent many threatening letters to a couple of my friends. Now, I didn't have very many friends. So I sent a couple of them to Fadio de Doulier and John Locke. These two were my great friends and best friends, and they sent letters back reassuring that if I was okay or if I needed some help. Obviously, I had gone mad, so I needed help. And so, in one of these letters, my friend John Locke, he was very sick, and I tell him that if you're sick, why not just die? So, and he knew instantly that I either had gone mad or I was just, something was very wrong with me. And about 3 years or 2 years after this, I come out of this nervous breakdown, and all my ideas change. From going from to liking mathematics and science, I start to develop new ideas for chemistry and the color spectrum. Now, in 1727, I come to my last Royal Society meeting, and I am there, and my health begins to fail. And I happened to fall down, and many people were hoping that I wouldn't die that day. But unfortunately, a couple of months later, I died, and my friends decided to bury me in the King's Church, or the King's Palace called Westminster Abbey. And now that I know that I was buried with the kings of England, that I know that people had recognized my work, and a couple years after this, my work for Principia Mathematica, the second and the third, were published after this. And many people think of me today as maybe like a thinker, but I want people to think of me as a great scientist who has accomplished many things in their life, not only just coming up with the 3 laws of motion and gravity. Any questions?
Yeah, tell me who you are, and then also what the conditions were like when growing up in your country.
I am Isaac Newton, and I had been named after my father. Had died, and my mother was greatly disappointed that he died, so she decides to name me after him. And what was the question again?
What were the conditions like growing up in your country?
Okay, growing up in my country, I was growing up as a farmer. My mother and father were both farmers, and my uncle had quite an amount of wealth as well. So I had been adopted pretty much by my grandmother, so I had to grow up with her, and I was pretty much treated like an orphan. Now, we had enough food at the time, and I was living during the scientific revolution, and there was also a war going on in England, a civil war in England at the time. But I'm pretty sure that I lived off. My childhood was great.